Okay, well, you wanna get started?
Yes, sir. Let's do it.
Okay, so first I want to start off with who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Sam Scheid. I am currently a private pilot for a business and family out of Provo, Utah. I fly several airplanes for them, and I fly their helicopter. I've been a pilot for about a professional pilot, commercial pilot for about 5.5, almost 6 years now. Previous to that, I was a military helicopter pilot. I
Well,
live in Utah, and I've got a little bit about me. I've got six small kids. Well, they're not small anymore; they're getting big. I've got a 13-year-old daughter, an almost 12-year-old son. He'll be 12 in about 2.5 weeks now. I've got a 9-year-old son. I've got a 7-year-old son, and I have 6-year-old twin girls. We live in Heber City, Utah. Like I said, I think I said it. We homeschool our kids, so we're a little bit outside the norm, a little bit different than most people.
yeah, I'm homeschooled too. It's
Oh, good
it's
for
the
you.
best.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
But so what's your story in the military?
So my story in the military, I joined the military back. I went through the recruiting process back in 2008, and I joined in spring of 2009 on the delayed entry program. I kind of uh, I always had a desire to go into the military. After high school, I graduated on May 31st, 2001. And then we all know what happened just a few months later was September 11th, 2001, when the terrorist attacks happened on the World Trade Center. And so I did go down to a recruiting station. I talked to everybody, and I was given this little a DVD of a Navy SEAL recruiting video. And so I had made up my mind that I was going to go become a Navy SEAL, and I would hide up in my room and I would watch this DVD of this little recruitment video of Navy SEALs. Never talked to my parents about that, but instead of doing that, I ended up going on an LDS church mission to Mexico. And that was 2 years long. Came home and I kind of entertained the idea once again of joining the military. My brother was in the Air Force, and my dad was a retired helicopter pilot from the Army. So I kicked around both of those options. I talked to an Army recruiter, kind of went through a few meetings with him, and then ultimately ended up not doing it with the Army. I ended up going to college just a little bit to realize I didn't really want to be in college. And my brother convinced me to talk to his friend who was a Air Force recruiter to maybe go become a military intelligence linguist. So I would go learn another language. I spoke Spanish fluently. And so I took a test called the D Lab with the military, and I passed that, or I got a high enough score that I could have learned essentially any language that I wanted to. But then again, ultimately didn't do that either. Um, I think I was kind of a tease to a lot of recruiters. And then one more time, I was going through the recruiting process to become a JTAC in the Air Force, and I had been swimming every day with an Air Force recruiter. And by the time it came time for me to take a prerequisite swim exam, I went skiing on Saturday prior to me doing this, and I broke my arm, so I
Oh,
ended up not
man.
doing that either. And then I was like, like I feel like every time I try and do this military thing, something kind of comes up or gets in the way, and I end up not doing it. It doesn't feel right, so I never ended up doing it. And then I was kind of stuck in a job that I knew I didn't want to do. I was a salesman. Uh, it was a love hate with it. I worked with a lot of really cool, fun people, but I didn't enjoy what I did. And that military itch never went away. So once again, I went down to a recruiter's office, talked to a recruiter. Um, they proceeded to show me recruiting videos for probably close to 2 hours. Seemed like forever. It was fun watching them because it's like, here's what a infantryman does. Here's what a special forces guy does. Here's what artillery does. Here's what, like psyops, like all these different branches and all these different jobs in the military. This is what we do. And it's fun to watch him. And at the end of it, he knew I wanted to be a pilot, but at the end of it, he goes, "So what's it going to be?" And I said, "I still just want to be a pilot." And he goes, "Well, take some of these videos home with you." Sent me home with some VHS, like big old VHS tapes that were, I don't even know why he had those anymore. But I took those home and I didn't even watch them because I knew I wanted to be a pilot. Came back in on Monday morning, and the guy goes, "So what's it going to be? 18 X-ray, which would have been a special forces candidate." And I said, no, I want to go to flight school. I want to go into the warrant officer program. And he kind of just said, man, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to work with you. And literally like something out of a comedy movie, somebody on the other side of the room behind us, his name was Sergeant First Class Dennis Norad. He pushes off his table and he's got these big, thick glasses on, kind of a big, goofy grin. He's from Oklahoma or something like that. And he's like, oh, I've never helped anybody get in the Army. I mean, you'll be my first ones, but I'll help you. He had a real bad stutter. And I was like, oh, geez. Like, oh, well, I mean, if that's what it takes to work with you, like, hey, let's do this. And turns out somebody else had been in previously and gotten the same runaround of like I want to do that. I want to be a pilot. But to be honest, I don't understand how the recruiters points and stuff work. I know for pilots, it's different. We don't count towards their monthly bonuses and things like that. So there's no incentive for them to help somebody get into the warrant officer pilot program with the Army. But there was another guy named Ryan. We did it together, everything together. We took the ASVAB together. We both scored high enough. And the difference in me and Ryan is that Ryan had his airplane pilot's license. So he was a pilot already. He was much further along in his college career than I was. I was just kind of this bum that all I did was go to college and then I didn't like it. And so I would drop all my classes except for one. Like I would keep like an easy class just to continuously, slowly work at it. Not very smart financially, not the best way to do college. But I remember everybody kind of every step along the way, like we would meet somebody new, in the process, and they'd say, why are you doing this? Like you're wasting everybody's time. Most people who go to Army flight school, they have, something, they have a discriminator that you don't have, whether it's a college degree or they have previous flight experience, or they were previously in the military as a maintainer or like a helicopter repairman, or they did something in the military. Like you don't have any of that. So why do you keep wasting everyone's time? And I was like, I don't know, like as long as I keep making it through the next gate, I'll continue to, I guess, waste all your time. And took the ASVAB, which is the Armed Services Vocational and Battery Test, something like that. I don't remember, but I took that. I got high enough, scored high enough on that I can continue in the process. The next test along the way was called the AFAST, which was the Aviation Flight Aptitude and Skills Test, which they've since done away with. It's now called the SIF or SIFT or something like that. But that was a test that had a bunch of really random questions on it to kind of determine like your psychological profile. One question, like it was like you had to pick between, like it'd be these would you rather questions that were really, really strange. Like, would you rather pop a blister on your friend's toe or go to the dentist? You're like, well, I don't know. I don't want to do either of those. They're both terrible, but you pick one, right? And somehow based on the answers that you provide, it profiles you into this category that's like, okay, yeah, the personality traits of this individual would, like qualify you for flight. Then the other portion of that was you would look at a bunch of instruments like an airplane, and you'd have to be able to read that instrument. Is it turning? Is it descending? Is it climbing? And it was these black and white photos. So you're like squinting to see what it is and decipher what it is. And anyways, I did well enough on that test as well. I went to a board and sat in front of a couple senior military officers and answered a bunch of questions as to why I think I deserve a shot at, Army flight school. And again, like these gates are along the way, and everybody kept telling me I'm wasting everybody's time. There's no way you're going to make it. They're like, Ryan, he's going to make it, but I mean, really slim chance. And I'm like, well, I mean, slim chances that I would have passed these tests, whatever. So anyways, eventually, it was just after New Year's, back in 2009, we were sitting down at the recruiting station waiting for the final answer. We'd done our flight physicals and we both passed those. We'd done our local board that we had to sit in front of the panel here in Utah. Then that was recommended to a national level board that we don't have any oversight. All they did was just look at our profile or the packet that our recruiter had put together on us. And I remember he kept coming out. He'd say 2 minutes, 2 minutes. But we were there like, and every time I see Ryan to this day, like our little inside joke is, hey man, 2 minutes. And it's to us, it's pretty funny, but it was pretty dumb. We sat there for several hours, but he comes out and he's like, I don't know what y'all did right, but you're both going to flight school. And I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. So yeah, soon enough, we shipped off together to basic training. It was like the end of April 2009. As great of an experience as it could be, I guess. I didn't enjoy it at all. It was a lot of, I was 26 at the time. So I was several years older than Ryan even was. And most people that were in basic training, most of these guys are 18 years old. right out of high school. I'd had a little bit of life experience. I'd lived on my own in a foreign country in Mexico for 2 years as a missionary. Then I was doing my own thing, just working as a salesman for several years. And so it was a lot of people that, perhaps they had a troubled past that they were trying to run away from, or, like, hey, it's either this, go to jail or the military type thing for some of these kids that were in basic training. And I call them kids because that's how they acted, and that's how they seemed, compared to some of us other ones that were there. And it was, they a lot of shouting, a lot of yelling, a lot of, creative uses of profanity that I'd never heard before, from the drill sergeants. And it goes, was like 9 or 10 weeks long. And each, like, 3 weeks you go through phases. I don't remember. I think it was like white, red, and blue phase. And each phase you got a little more like leeway as far as, like, a little bit of free time. Um, Honestly, I can say I didn't enjoy basic training much at all. We shot a lot of M16s. I threw a grenade. There were some fun things about it, but to me, it was just like, I was bored. I was kind of waiting for the time to pass to be done, because I knew I had better things to look forward to, like eventually learning to fly helicopters. Finished that like right or like sometime in July. Drove down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which was where I was going to go to flight school. But before I could go to flight school, I had to go into a school called Warrant Officer Candidate School, or WOC school. It was how I obtained my commission to become an officer, to be a pilot. I was in a 6-week course because I was what was called street to seat. They had a shortened version for anybody who was like an E5 or an E6 or above that could go to the short course. But I was in the 6-week course, and so it was just a little more of that, just hazing. You had to fold your t-shirts. You had tan t-shirts that you wore under your ACUs, your Army uniform. You had to fold these tan t-shirts. I don't know, it was like 6x6 exactly, and your name stenciled across the chest, centered on there, and it had to be like stacked in your drawers, like no more than 3 high. Socks had to be rolled a specific way with your name on it. Everything was like complete order. And every morning you'd have a room inspection. They'd come in with rulers. Like your top drawer is supposed to be open like 2 inches, the bottom one 3, the middle one 3 inches, the bottom one 4 inches. And they'd come in there with rulers, and they'd be like, you're a 16th of an inch off. And because of that, like, your whole room would get messed up. So every day you just got used to refolding all your clothes and remaking your bed, because they would destroy the whole entire room, which was just part of the process. And it's what they say. It's like, they say it a lot, attention to detail. If you can't focus on these little details right now with folding your t-shirts and folding your socks and all your other things, how are you ever going to fly a helicopter and maintain that attention to detail? Which I thought I had nothing to do with anything, and it really didn't, other than it's just I guess we'll call it a rite of passage. Anyway, we had a lot of fun. We goofed off a lot. Just a bunch of like-minded individuals that are all eventually going to become pilots, just goofing off, all in your, mid to late 20s, and just immature dudes that, we goof off and had fun. Eventually we finished that and go to flight school, or we began flight school. Flight school was a lot of fun. You go through, let's see, it's 8 weeks of primary, they call it, flying a TH-67, a training helicopter. The civilian term is it's a Bell Jet Ranger. 8 weeks of that, where you just learn to hover. You learn specific emergency procedures. You learn how to memorize a whole bunch of crap that really, like, it applies to everything, but you have to memorize everything about this helicopter, and then you flush that because you'll never fly that helicopter ever again. So, you do a bunch of auto rotations, which is, if you're flying a helicopter and your engines quit, that's the only way you're going to make it to the ground alive, is if you can successfully auto rotate. So you do several iterations of traffic pattern work, learning just how to talk on the radio, how to fly the helicopter, and then you jump into emergency procedures with auto rotations, or, loss of tail rotor effectiveness, many different emergency procedures that can happen in a helicopter. Until you can master all those, it's 8 weeks, take a check ride, and then you roll right into another 8 weeks of instrument flying, which is where I think the first 3 weeks were in simulators, and then you finally got to go fly a helicopter. But that, you're wearing a hood, they call it. So you're wearing a little visor over your helmet, so you can't see outside, and you're just relying 100% on your instruments. Take off this heading, fly this direction at this heading, go to this navigational beacon at this altitude, and when you get there, then you turn, whatever. So it's all based on instrumentations, and it's just a lot of, studying involved in that. Then from there, you go into BWS, which all this is different, by the way. Now they don't do it flight school like this anymore, as far as I know. But from there, you roll into basic warfighting skills, which was a 3-week 3-week class. Part of it was in a TH-67, the same helicopters, and then the other half of it was in a OH-58 little scout helicopters. And that was fun. That was like the doors were off the helicopters and you were flying right on tops of the trees doing Army flying. You were learning how to tactically fly, how to
Mm.
evaluate an LZ, are there wires? What's the slope? What's the long axis? What's the wind doing? How to approach this? It was a lot more fun. That's the kind of flying that we end up doing as Army aviators. And that was 3 weeks. And then based on how well you did throughout all of flight school, all the previous 19, 20 weeks of flying, they put you into an OML, order of merit list, and then you select your advanced airframe. And selection, you're just in a big classroom with all your peers. Um, they rate you, 1 through however many there are in the class. And then up on the board, they have all the helicopters you can pick. Back in the day, it was UH-60 Blackhawk, AH-64 Apaches, OH-58 Delta, Kiowas, or CH-47 Chinooks. And everybody, just based on how well you did, just went down the list, and they called out your name, and there were all those airframes listed up on a whiteboard with marks next to it. And as everyone picked, then those marks slowly disappeared. It got to me. I picked Chinooks, which is this guy right here, a tandem rotor helicopter. And from there, it was like 22 more weeks of all things Chinooks. You basically start over. You can go through the entire flight school phase all over again, where you learn how to fly Chinook. Then you go into instruments on it, then you go into tactics on it, and you go into nights on it. And a lot of fun. By far my favorite helicopter. I love flying Chinooks. It was amazing. I did that active duty for 8 years, left active duty. COVID happened. I was an airline pilot at the time, went into the National Guard here in Utah, and I learned how to fly Apaches. And I flew Apaches in flight school, and I had 1 flight in Utah as an Apache pilot. And then I ended up leaving the military altogether and focusing on just civilian flying, which is what I do now for a family. I fly their airplanes, and they have a helicopter that I'm lucky enough to continue to fly. Kind of have a dream job, to be honest. So that's me in kind of a nutshell regarding what I did in the military. Brief synopsis. I had 2 deployments to Afghanistan, both as a Chinook pilot. I was stationed in Ansbach, Germany, for the majority of my time active duty as a Chinook pilot. And from there, I deployed twice to Afghanistan, once in 2012 until 2013. And then I went back in 2014 for a short 6-month deployment.
So it sounds like a lot of tests and courses and stuff
Lots
to
of,
be taken.
lots of it.
Did you, before you got into flight school, did you ever feel like hopeless that you'd ever get to be a pilot?
Oh, all the time. Because you hear in school, well, I remember hearing in school, like if you're not good at math, you'll never be a pilot, because pilots have to understand math. And I've never been a good test taker. It's funny because even in the Army, like we would take tests, and I would get done, and I'd look around and I'd be like, man, nobody's done yet except for me. And so I would like go back over the entire test and be like, all right, I'm still the only one that's done right now, or maybe somebody else is in my same boat. And then I would always wait for 1 or 2 people to finally finish the test to go turn in my answer sheet. And I was never like 100%. Like there'd be times where I did get 100%, but that was very abnormal. And I felt like I always had to study harder and work harder than everybody else. When everybody else was out partying and doing their thing, I was, sitting in my house. I was married, sitting at home with my wife, studying flashcards or trying to memorize and review the study material that we were given. Whereas I felt like a lot of my peers, like they would hear it in class and that was it. They were good to go. They'd go home, they'd go party, they'd go do their thing. And then we'd all show up the next day, me having stayed up all night studying, them having stayed up all night partying, and we'd all have the same end result, it seemed like. So I felt like I had to work harder.
What do you think separated you from the other people that wanted to get into flight school?
I think the big outlier was when I began applying, I knew these tests were going to be hard, especially the AFAST. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I bought this book. It was a thick book, like not little at all, and it had several practice tests in there. And I remember I went into work and I made copies. I made like 100 copies of this test, and every day I would just sit there and I would take this test over and over and over again. So I basically had that whole test memorized. We get down to the MEP station for the time for me to take the AFAST test. And I start looking at the test and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the exact same test that I've practiced 100 times. And so again, I just like zipped through it all. Like I know like all these attitude indicators had the exact same pictures that were in this book. And I was like, this is literally the exact same thing. And so I finished like super quick. I look over at Ryan and he's like halfway done. And I was like, oh no, I probably messed something up. Ryan's this like, but he didn't do the same studying that I did, but he still passed. So I felt like I didn't, again, I literally sat there for 3, 4, 5 hours a day and I would study these tests, not only the pictures of the attitude indicators and everything, but also there were several questions about flying. Um, Honestly, I don't even remember, but it would be like a question of like what is the best conditions for flying a helicopter, and then it would have all these different answers. And if there's in a military test, if there's ever a multiple choice question and the answer is D, all of the above, pick D, all of the above, because that's how they write Army tests. Didn't figure that out later on in life.
So, what was your favorite part about serving in the military?
My favorite part about serving in the military was the sense of accomplishment I felt every day putting on my uniform. I loved on our right shoulder, we always wore an American flag. The flag means a lot to me. America means a lot to me. And it was always a source of pride for me to have been able to serve. I come from a long line of veterans. Um, my older brother is in the Air Force. My little brother is medically retired from the Army. My dad is retired from the Army. My my dad's dad, he fought in the Korean conflict and World War II. My mom's dad was in the Korean conflict, and her dad, or let's see, my mom's grandpa, so my great grandpa, fought in World War I and World War II. So it goes back several generations for me. And it was just a sense of pride, a source of pride, having had the opportunity to wear a uniform, represent my country. You know, it said my last name on one side and then U.S. Army on the other side. I loved having the U.S. Army name tape, you know, and the American flag on my shoulder, knowing what it represented. And then if you've ever seen, like to me, if I see a military helicopter or military anything, jets or anything fly over, I don't get emotional, but I kind of choke up a little bit sometimes because I love seeing it. My favorite part about going to like an NFL or, you know, a college football game is the flyover. And once the flyover is done, I mean, I'm good. I can go home. I don't need to watch the game anymore. I feel fulfilled having seen that flyover because I love so much what they do. And when you get to go do that as your job, when you get to go jump into a military helicopter and you get to go support the ground force on a deployment where you're not training anymore, you're not, you know, shooting rubber bullets or pretending to do something, you're actually doing the real thing. And when you see the coordination of all the U.S. military come together with the ground force, with an aviation task force, you know, and then there's the helicopter portion of it, but then there's the Air Force, Navy, everybody with all these different stacks of different assets and helicopters and jets that go all the way up to 40,000 feet coordinated. You know, you've got A-10s above you, or you got Apaches above you, you got A-10s above that, you've got drones, you've got F-15s, F-16s, you got bombers way, 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 way up there at 40,000 feet dropping bombs. When it all, this big coordinated effort comes in to support the ground force, there's nothing more amazing, there's nothing more impressive in the world to me than the military, U.S. military force being applied against an enemy who deserves to, well, die or be captured. You know what I mean? So it was a source of pride for me, for sure.
Flyovers at those NFL games are pretty sick. With the
Yeah.
like, I've seen Chinooks over them, the F-16s, they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
what was your least favorite part?
Least favorite part was all the administrative training we had to do. We did a lot of, I'd say, a very small percentage of my job in the Army was actually flying. Um, I became an instructor pilot in the Chinook. Um, but even then, there's so much administrative stuff that you have to do in the military. You know, you have to, because the military is a big government organization, and just like anybody else, they have an HR department, which is uh, whatever. But you do a lot of things, like you focus on things that don't really apply or matter to the U.S. fight, to like to a fighting force like the military. You know, we're more concerned about how do we integrate, you know, LGBT into the military, or how do we be inclusive with, you know, minorities in the military. And honestly, yeah, it's important that everybody feels included, but at the end of the day, you want next to you a very capable human being that can just do their job that they're supposed to do in the military. And my job as as a military person was to be a pilot. And I want to make sure that everybody that I'm flying with, be it another pilot or the crew members in the back that are crewing the helicopter, I want to make sure that all of us are coordinated in our efforts, that we're all on the same page, and that we know our jobs rather than focusing on things that really don't matter administratively. You know, you have these 40-hour blocks of, oh, hunt the good stuff, of resilience, as they called it, resiliency training. Or it'd be like, oh, everybody has to go down and do driver's ed training. Or, oh, everybody has to go to the, you know, this briefing over in the theater, and they're talking about, you know, sexual harassment, sexual assault prevention. All that stuff is important. Don't get me wrong. But let's be honest, if you're going to be in the military, I feel like the big boy rule should apply. And if you're doing things you're not supposed to be doing, then you should be dealt with. But I don't think we need to focus all of our time on these briefings, because it's clearly, if you look at the climate in the Army or in the military, they're clearly not completing the objective they're trying to do. You know, suicide prevention, all these things, it's still happening. So the things that they're trying to do to fix it aren't working. And to me, I felt like that just detracted from the mission that I was in the military to do, to be a pilot and to train younger pilots to be the best pilots that we could.
Just a quick check. Are you still good on time? I got like
Yeah, I'm
two or
good.
three minutes.
Yep, we'll
Okay.
be fine.
So, would you recommend that a young person go into the army when they get older?
Well, I wouldn't. That's a hard question for me to answer. It's because it's a much different military today than it was back, 15 years ago when I first joined the military, 14 years ago, whatever it was. Um, if the reason you're trying to join the military today is for the on the job training or the experience, then by all means. However, there's certain things that you do need to look at. I joined the military at a time where America was at war. You know, we were fighting a war in Iraq, we were fighting a war in Afghanistan, and parts of me, being as patriotic as I was, I wanted to go get my piece of quote unquote revenge for what had happened on 9/11 back in 2001. I knew I would never, ever directly be in that as a pilot, but, being able to support the ground force meant enough to me that I enjoyed doing it. However, that has changed now. And my political view of what the military does isn't necessarily like super positive. Like if you were to go to flight school today, your ADSO, your let's see, active duty service obligation or something like that, is 10 years from the day you complete flight school. So you're stuck in the Army for 10 years. Um, and for some people, that's cool. But for me, I don't know that I would do it today, knowing that I have a 10-year ADSO. For me, it was 6. All I had to do was 6 years, and then I could make a decision. I could come to that crossroads and say, okay, I want to continue, or, no, thanks. I've experienced what I want to experience. I had, 4 kids, and my wife was pregnant with twins when I opted to get out of the military. So it's a hard question, but if you're going to do it with the purpose of obtaining education or the education benefits for the GI Bill, then there are certain things that are good about it. But I don't know if you remember the call on Matt's call. I
Yeah,
ended up
yeah.
eventually kind of getting kicked out of the Army because I refused to take the COVID vaccine. Personal choice. And a lot of people said, well, you took the other vaccines. Why won't you take this vaccine? Hey, personal choice. I fought overseas for people to have freedom, the same type of freedom in their lives. Why can't I be afforded the same decision here? It's not making me anything any less or any more safe, based on the research and information that I had read about it. And ultimately that led to my separation from the National Guard here in Utah, which, hey, to each their own. So I have a hard time being encouraging of young people to go into the military. If you do go into the military, I just recommend that you 100% do your homework and know exactly what you're getting yourself into, know the pros, know the cons, know the climate that you're going into, what kind of landscape exists in the world today. Are we actively fighting wars that we're engaged in? I mean, right now you've got Ukraine popping off, you've got Israel popping off. Who knows what's going to happen over with China and Taiwan? So we're on the verge of fighting 3 separate wars around the world right now. Do you want to get involved with that? Are you looking to start a family? Because family life in the military is extremely difficult. There's so many variables that go into joining the military. I think it's a very admirable job for a human being to go do. I think service is amazing. I think it's in many ways should be I don't want to say mandatory. I don't want to full on say it should be mandatory, but I think there should be some level of service where you give back to your country, because this country gives us so many amazing things. It affords us so many freedoms that if you go into the world, you look around the world and you see how other countries live their lives, or they live, they don't have what we have in America. We've been extremely blessed to be in America, to have freedoms to say what we want to say. To you want to be homeschooled, I want to homeschool my kid. My son's sitting right here. We want to homeschool them. We have the abilities and the freedoms to do what we want to do because we're a free country. And I love that we're free, and I want it to stay free. And I do want good people to be in the military. However, it's it's just kind of a hard climate to be a part of right now with the changing landscape and the focuses of what we focus on and what we emphasize in the military. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it seems like a very, very tough thing to go into. You have to know that you want to do it and you want to do it for a little
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's a big commitment, and there are options like National Guard. It's you can do that at your home state at the home level, and every state has basically anything the active duty military has. The National Guard can essentially, I'm pretty sure, do for you as well, but on a lesser commitment. It's just 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, unless you're a pilot. In the National Guard, you're not doing 1 weekend a month. You've got to go in and you have minimums you're required to maintain. So that means you go to your day job and then you go to your night job, which will be flying a helicopter. So there are the difficulties of it, but again, it's doable. So if you're looking, my advice would be is if you're looking for a specific way of achieving a goal for your career, be it medical or aviation's a good one because they pay for all your aviation training, and then you get to go into the world and you can become an airline pilot with all the aviation training that you get from the military, and the return on investment, if you will, from being an airline pilot or a pilot in today's climate or today's market. It's a very lucrative profession to get into if you can withstand the military portion of it.
seems yeah, it seems pretty like logical. Like you just need to know that you want it and
Yeah,
follow through with the commitment.
sure. Yeah.
Um, so the next question is, what made you want to start? You mentioned that your dad was a helicopter pilot. Did that play into you wanted to be a pilot yourself?
100%. I remember when I was a little kid, I was probably 7 or 8 years old. We lived at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and my dad had just deployed to Iraq or wherever, Kuwait, back in 1990, 1991 timeframe. And I'll never forget when he came home from that. He was gone like 9 months. We're all sitting there at Fort Campbell, and all these airplanes start landing, and it's just this chaotic scene of people walking down the airfield and everyone looking for their soldiers. And I remember seeing my dad, and all of his army gear, and thinking that's the coolest thing ever right there. And then back in those days, they used to have these, I don't even know what they're called, but we'd go watch these demonstrations of the military. It was so cool. They'd have tanks out there shooting, they'd have helicopters coming in, guys fast roping, and all these machine guns going off. And my dad would always be a part of that, flying his Black Hawk over the top. And I remember I used to have this photo. I don't know what happened to it, but there's me. I used to have this white blonde hair. I was wearing a little white cutoff t-shirt, standing somewhere at Fort Campbell, and my dad's in his helicopter just back behind me. Or I was, so you could see my back, and I was staring at my dad. He was, out in the distance, and he was in a helicopter. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever, seeing my dad do that, and then always wanting to, do that for myself, just fly helicopters. And um, eventually that dream became my reality, and it's the life I lived.
That seems pretty cool, like from your dad being a helicopter pilot and you like respecting him and like for that, and then you ending up being a pilot yourself. It's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, it was pretty special. And to be honest, my two brothers just recently started flight school. They're not doing helicopter stuff; they're doing airplane training. And my older brother, who's about to retire from the Air Force, just took his first flight in an airplane on Saturday. Um, and I like to think that I had some small part, inspiring them to chase their dream of aviation, because we've all had it, right? All of us and my siblings, we all had the itch to do it. And now seeing them later on in their lives, make the jump into aviation, it's pretty cool. Um, I, to be able to mentor them, it's pretty special, because they're brothers. One's in Florida in flight school, and the other one's right here in Utah doing flight school. And it's, getting my little brother that's in Florida. He just soloed the other day. I got the video of him landing an airplane for the first time all by himself. Like, it's pretty special, right? Like, and in many ways, I'm sure my dad has that same sense of pride seeing his sons follow in his footstep, go military aviation, and then for the other two boys to just get the aviation bug and fly with it, right? So it's cool.
Man, that's pretty cool. Unfortunately, I love this talk with you, but that is my last question for me to ask you. So I
Okay.
just want to thank you. And I could ask you questions all day if I had more, but man,
Well,
I
if you
just
have
love
more,
talking
shoot
with
me an
you.
email. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. If it's something that you're seriously considering, or if this is just an assignment in your studies right now, like either way, I'm happy to be able to answer those questions. And if I don't know the answers, well, I know several people who are or were in the military who'd be able to answer those questions for you. So happy to fill in and be that example from the military, or be able to give you the answers that you need.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great
Yeah, you're
guy.
welcome.
Great
Oh, thank you.
answers.
Thank you.
I
That's nice of you.
appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.
Pleasure's mine. Okay,
Yeah,
take care.
thank you.
You're welcome.